If you've grown up in Australia and pay some attention to the news, you'd probably be aware that Australian governments, federal and state, love a budget surplus. From recent budgets of the federal government in 2024 and 2023, to the state of Western Australia making a killing on its minerals post-COVID, to the state of New South Wales pre-COVID streak of 6 years of surplus. But what about the oft overlooked level of government, which people don't tend to care about unless they have nothing better to do with their time? What about the financial fortunes of local government? I first became one of those people with nothing better to do way back when in 2021. My fascination with the fiscal fortunes of local government was sparked by Not Just Bike's Strongtown series, which dived into the financial reality of North American cities. I wanted to see how local government around my home city of Sydney, Australia performed, and if similar factors, especially population density, affected their finances too. If you haven't seen the Strongtown series on local government, the basic financial premise for why population density is good is that costs of providing the most basic services like transport, water, and waste are far more a factor of the area of land covered rather than the population covered. As an example, take this hypothetical town with 20 houses. It has hundreds of meters of roads, footpaths, and pipes to maintain, and the garbage truck has to go around all these streets to pick up everyone's rubbish. That all costs more money. Now look at another hypothetical town, also with 20 homes, but has 20 apartments, all in one building. There is far less road and piping for the town to maintain while servicing the same population, and the garbage truck only has to make one stop. So hypothetically, the denser town can provide the same quality of service for a lower cost. Of course, real towns will have many more buildings and residents to service, but the same principle applies at any scale. Now, unfortunately, metrics for the management of local governments in Australia will need to be different from those seen in North America, as the political structure and responsibilities of each are significantly different. For example, in Australia, there are no distinctions between cities, counties, incorporated towns, and all that confusing stuff North America has. These different coverages of local government are all combined into one type of entity in Australia, creatively known as local government areas, or LGA for short. They can also simply be referred to as councils. The fiscal responsibility of LGAs can be quite important in day-to-day life. If your rubbish doesn't get picked up, your parks are looking unkempt, and the potholes in your neighborhood are turning into pot-gaping chasms, your LGA probably isn't doing the best financially. Unfortunately, understanding the financial statements for LGAs can be a bit confusing. In my memory of having looked at hundreds of sets of their financial statements, LGAs are almost always recording a budget surplus. But this clearly does not reflect in reality with the disparity in services that some communities face compared to others. Let's take a look at the City of Blacktown Council as an example. This LGA is a broadly suburban area in Western Sydney, and according to their 2024 annual financial statements, they recorded a whopping surplus of over $200 million and $250 million the year before that. With revenue only totaling $1.3 billion in that time, if Blacktown were a business, they would have had a stellar profit margin of roughly 1/3 in those 2 years. The CEO is understandably proud to state this as delivering a balanced budget for Blacktown in their annual report. But how can Blacktown be delivering such a strong profit each year and be only an average at best socio-economic area in Sydney? Are high socio-economic areas so well off in comparison that community pools are filled with gold instead of water for residents to fulfill their Scrooge McDuck fantasies? Well, if we look closer at the financial statements, we can see there is an additional line at the bottom of the page stating net result before grants and contributions for capital purposes, in which the net operating result is actually a loss in both years. These grants and contributions for capital purposes can be the largest source of revenue for some councils, yet financial statements for all LGAs are required to include a line showing what their budget would be without it. Why? In short, because it's not in an LGA's best interest to rely on these grants and contributions. Grants usually represent programs by the state and national governments to improve community infrastructure where they see fit, not necessarily where an LGA might see fit, and funding might be conditional. Contributions, on the other hand, are paid by property developers according to predefined contribution plans for the area they want to develop, which require them to contribute funds towards planned infrastructure like road upgrades and parks. Contributions received are therefore already required to be spent on such particular infrastructure and cannot be used to fund other aspects of an LGA's operations. This inflexible and conditional nature of these sources of revenue are why it is seen as important to assess the operating result excluding them. Needing this external funding to function limits the autonomy of a council to act for the interests of their own community. Grants and contributions for operating purposes are essentially the same thing, but for operating costs of community programs and services like libraries, rather than costs of building the infrastructure. For some reason, however, there is nowhere in the council financial statements where the operating costs less both capital and operating grants and contributions is stated. Weird, but okay. The state government does find it important enough to record what percentage of their revenue is not from both types of grants and contributions under the mandated own source revenue metric for exactly the same reasons as previously stated regarding autonomy. Using own source revenue, we could calculate backwards the total own source operating balance without capital or operating grants and contributions, as long as we also know the original operating balance and either total expenses or total revenue. Checking through the state's Department of Local Government's database, which neatly collates data about all LGAs in the state, we can see the operating balance there, own source revenue here, and total expenses. There's just one issue. The own source revenue metric only goes to 2 decimal places, which can cause differences of several $100,000 from the actual result for large LGAs. So the only way to accurately calculate the own source net operating balance is to read through each set of LGA's financial statements for each year. This is, in fact, what I have been doing for several years, and I cannot say that it is fun. It is certainly tedious, even with my scope limited to the 30 LGAs located in the Sydney urban area. My data goes back to 2017, as before that, in 2016, a lot of LGAs in Sydney had their jurisdictions changed from mergers and border adjustments implemented by the state government. To compare councils evenly, I will be looking at their own source operating balance per resident. So from financial year 2017 to financial year 2024, the average own source operating balance of Sydney councils was appalling. Wow. Just 2 out of 30 didn't lose money, with many losing more than $100 per resident. With the original inspiration being based on the Strongtown series, let's visualize how the rate of losses compares depending on the population density of LGAs in Sydney. Fortunately, by having so many LGAs which cover all aspects of urban Sydney, from the dense core to the outer suburbs and everything in between, comparing densities at the LGA level may well provide a clear picture of the significance of population density in determining financial health. So here's the density of each LGA in 2024, and here's their own source operating balances. Outside of the most dense LGA, the City of Sydney, being one of the 2 consistently profitable areas, there's no clear correlation visible. COVID had a big impact on council finances, so maybe we should just look at pre-COVID results. Still no clear correlation? Perhaps post-COVID? Okay, so there's no simple correlation showing for population density as I would have liked, but there are still other interesting things to look at. The 2 stereotypically rich areas of Sydney are the eastern suburbs and the North Shore. These 2 wealthy areas have very different outcomes though. If we look at each individual year, we can see that the eastern suburbs, with the most glamorous harbourside mansions, privileged private schools, and gorgeous beaches, are pretty awful with money. They are relatively dense and are home to incredible wealth, but without support from higher levels of government, they would be broke beyond belief. This compares to some of the less well-off areas of Sydney, which are able to have some semblance of fiscal responsibility and rely less on state and federal funding, such as Blacktown from earlier on in the video. The North Shore, on the other hand, with its glamorous estately mansions, privileged private schools, and gorgeous forests, has some of the strongest councils financially. I'm not too sure what factors make socio-economically similar areas have such different outcomes, but one weird possible factor is golf courses. My father suggested that the North Shore is home to numerous council-owned golf courses, which provide an additional income stream the eastern suburbs do not. When comparing golf courses that are owned by councils, we can see that the North Shore does have more than the eastern suburbs, but some councils like Mosman don't have any golf courses at all, yet still have maintained healthy finances. If we look back at how LGAs have performed each year, there is one which appears to have steadily improved its finances over time. Parramatta. If you know anything about the news in Sydney, you've probably heard countless headlines about Parramatta becoming Sydney's second central business district. The city of Sydney, which already contains the main CBD, has had own source surplus every year outside of the pandemic. So maybe we can see how businesses affect the financial outcomes of local governments. In 2018, the LGAs that earned the most revenue from charging rates to businesses on a per resident basis were Sydney, unsurprisingly in number 1, then Willoughby, which has a large business district around Chatswood, then North Sydney, and in 4th place, Parramatta, making only a quarter of what the City of Sydney did per resident. These councils were all hubs for business and have all delivered some own source surpluses, so being a hub with a high concentration of businesses compared to your population, as well as being a hub gives leverage to charge higher rates, is clearly going to be beneficial for a council's finances. As Parramatta CBD has continued to grow since 2018, including the addition of the largest office building in the country at Parramatta Square, we can expect their business rates to have increased accordingly. In 2024, Sydney was again the highest, exceeding $1,000 in revenue from businesses per resident. In second was now North Sydney, in third Willoughby, and in fourth again is Parramatta. Have their business rates at least seen a large increase in this time? Not at all. Their business rates increase per resident has been below average, and in fact below inflation. Even though the average rate Parramatta charges a business has seen the largest increase across Sydney of 55% due to the increased prominence of Parramatta CBD, the number of businesses has actually declined by 20%, which, combined with an 11% increase in population, nullifies the real growth in income from businesses. So why has Parramatta been delivering more reliable surpluses? Well, we can get a clue by looking at the portion of their revenue that comes from charging council rates to residents and businesses. In 2018, council rates made up 59% of Parramatta's income. In 2024, however, it was way down to just 43% of their total income. Their fiscal fortunes have come from alternative income, but is this income sustainable? Not at all. Digging into their financial statements, in 2017 there was nothing remarkable in Parramatta's finances, and their own source operating result was negative $29 million. In 2018 it was much the same, with a negative $28 million result. Then, in 2019, they delivered their first surplus with a positive $12 million result. Here though, there is a noteworthy change in their financials. They sold some of their land for $45 million more than what the land was valued at on their balance sheet. This happens from time to time with councils and can deliver very strong one-off results, such as Lane Cove's phenomenal $592 of surplus per resident in 2017. Although Lane Cove still delivers healthy operating results without relying on gains from asset sales, unlike Parramatta, whom in this case would have otherwise lost about $30 million in 2019, in line with their previous 2 years. In 2020, the only noteworthy development in Parramatta's financials was a drop in expenses for providing services, probably due to the onset of the pandemic reducing the demand for services since everyone was stuck in their own home. This helped Parramatta to deliver a smaller loss of just $14 million. In 2021, they delivered another small surplus, this time as a result of an unexpected land sale. The new Sydney Metro line had begun construction this year, and the new station in the heart of Parramatta's CBD was to be built on Parramatta Council-owned land. This forced land acquisition was done generously for 56% more than the value council had for the land on their own balance sheet, generating a $31 million increase in revenue, without which Parramatta would have yet again had a loss of roughly $30 million. In 2022, construction on the new Parramatta Light Rail by the state government was underway. Its construction included new cycleways, a new bridge, and new green space, all paid for by the state. In 2022, $16 million worth of these community assets were completed and handed over to the council. This was able to be recorded as other income for Parramatta rather than a capital grant, inflating their own source operating result to positive $12 million. Without receiving these free assets, they would have managed a much healthier loss, but still a loss of just $4 million. In 2023, they received the last tranche of community assets from the Parramatta Light Rail, totaling $37 million, without which they would have delivered a loss of again about $30 million. Finally, in 2024, Parramatta delivered their biggest own source surplus yet, at almost $15 million. Surely this was big enough to have been a surplus without receiving free stuff from the state as revenue, right? Do you remember that land that they had to sell to Sydney Metro in 2021? Well, let me quote verbatim from the notes of their 2024 financial statements. In August 2020, Council derecognised the site known as Horwood Place as part of the compulsory sale to Sydney Metro and recognised the offer received of $87 million. Council disputed the offer price, and in January 2021 lodged the request to Valuer-General New South Wales for the review of compensation in accordance with the Land Acquisition Just Terms Compensation Act. In November 2021, the Valuer-General issued their final offer of compensation and uplifted the offer price to $123 million. In considering the development potential of the acquired land, Council commenced a Class 3 proceeding in the Land and Environment Court objecting to the amount of compensation offered. In March 2024, the Land and Environment Court awarded Council to compensation of $201 million. As a result of the court ruling, Council recognised $75 million as part of other income, plus $11 million interest income received from Sydney Metro. If you didn't quite get that, the note explains that Parramatta had successfully argued with the state government that the parcel of land that Council had been forced to sell in 2021, that Council itself only had valued at $55 million on their own balance sheet, that had been sold for 56% more than said balance sheet value, really should have been sold for $201 million, almost 4 times the balance sheet value Council itself had originally given it. This resulted in Council receiving a one-time compensation of $86 million. Such revenue is obviously not sustainable, and without it, Parramatta should have in fact delivered their worst budget result yet, losing $71 million in their own source operating result. Being a hub for business activity was not enough otherwise to deliver Parramatta an own source surplus in any financial year. So, is there any pattern to be found that correlates with the fiscal results of LGAs? Yes, but we've been looking at it wrong. Induced demand is a simple but important concept. You might have heard this term with regards to building more road leads to more people driving, but the concept applies to almost everything. If there are more trains, people take trains more. If people have more money, people spend more money. And if local governments have more money to spend, they will also spend more money. So, if 2 LGAs, both with 100,000 residents, both have an own source operating result of losing $10 million, do they both provide the same level of service and amenity to their residents? Not necessarily. Council 1 could have spent $50 million while receiving 40 million, and Council 2 could have spent 100 million while receiving 90 million. Same net result, but $100 million in expenditure would hypothetically deliver better services to residents than 50 million in expenditure. To compare the service levels provided by LGAs, we should be comparing their capacity to spend on services, not their net operating result. To do this comparison, I took the total expenses of each LGA, divided it by the number of residents to get the per capita expenditure, and then added the own source operating balance per capita back to this figure. This either reduces or increases expenditure to the point where the LGA would have had a break-even budget result. Now, there can still be discrepancies here in spending capability, as a council that charges its residents higher rates can then afford to spend more money. To account for this, I have equalized for the rates charged to residents by adjusting the expenditure figure up or down depending on how a council's revenue would have changed if they charged their residents the Sydney-wide average of council rates per resident. This is the results. The adjusted spending capacity per capita of each LGA if they charged residents the average council rates. This is population density. Finally, colors that match. There certainly are going to be a multitude of factors that affect the fiscal outcomes of local government, like the high business rates Willoughby is able to charge, Parramatta's benefits from state infrastructure projects, and whatever the Northern Beaches is doing. There are a lot of golf courses there. Holistically though, of every factor we've looked at in Greater Sydney, we can see population density having the clearest correlation of any with improving a local government's ability to provide services for its residents. We can see this service level relation shine through with other factors, like the availability of council aquatic centres and libraries. And if we go back to the basic premise of density being better fiscally because it reduces the cost to provide basic services like roads, we can in fact see that the denser councils do have to spend a lower proportion of their money on roads. I hope this video has shown you that if you want better infrastructure and services from your local government in Australia, you should also want higher density housing. Alternatively, if you truly value low density living, you should understand that because of the financial reality of low density living, infrastructure and services will probably be worse for you. Thanks for watching. Let me know what you thought in the comments below. And if you enjoyed the video, consider subscribing as I have many more topics exploring urban and physical geography on the way.